little symbol. Okay.
Hello. Today we have somebody coming to us from Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome, Tim. Happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome. Yeah, we're excited to hear your story. So dig in how you'd like to tell it.
All right. So, yeah, I'm from Cleveland and I'm 56 years old and I was adopted. And now I understand a little bit more about the origin. And I was initially relinquished at birth and then spent maybe 60 days with a foster in a foster home, and then was adopted into a family who had previously adopted another child. So my sister was adopted 18 months before me. So my very typical in the late 60s. My mom couldn't have children, and so adoption was a way for them um, to build out the family that they wanted. And so I would say I was adopted into a pretty loving home. Um, and, I was raised in a Catholic setting. But, as I come to understand more and more about like the origin, there were some challenges, I think. And a lot of what I've learned is, looking at the ways in which unresolved trauma can just kind of um, play out through the generations. And my parents both had some things that maybe they hadn't dealt with, and therefore there's a lot of control and a lot of um, expectations. And so, like, as an adoptee, I always just felt like I didn't really belong, and I didn't really I see myself in my family, and I might have been like, let's say the one who stood out, like, hey, I don't belong. I'm not like interested in trying to conform, but I would have probably been like a chameleon where I would figure out, okay, what do I need to do to fit in at times and then rebel at other times. And so like I had this probably streaks of anger at times that would come out, and I can just remember things like my mom would say, well, I don't know what's wrong with you, I don't know what to do with you. And this is all hindsight, because like I now understand a lot of what it's all about is like this, deep wounds of abandonment, and all that. So I was really into sports, but my family wasn't. And so I just tried to find ways of, like, I'd say coping. And so sports was a thing.
Can did
Um,
they tell you at an early age of that
yeah,
era that you were
I don't,
adopted? And
I don't remember not knowing that I was adopted. So I think I would have been told, early. So there was no deception in that way. Um, I do think that it felt like I was discouraged from being curious about, like,
Mm.
I wonder, like, why was I given up? Or I wonder, like, what the story was with my birth mother. And I think that type of curiosity maybe triggered my mom a bit. Like, why would you want to know? And and so like the common narrative is like, you should be grateful, you should be happy, like you're wanted here. And I can intellectually understand that, but like you still have this sense of like there's, I must have done something, to be given up. And so like I think I also probably got bullied a little bit for being different. Like I felt different. And so like, if kids find out that you're adopted and they don't even know what that means, but you're different, and like, oh, somebody didn't want you. And so I think that some of that stuff kind of um, plagued me a bit during growing up. And so like I think I just tried to prove myself through achievement, through being tough, through sports achievements, school achievements. And, I I also had, I guess in my home, there were other secrets. And, like my dad had a twin brother who was same sex. He had a life partner who was my godfather, but we never talked about this. Never talked about
Mm,
the fact that like they were homosexual. And um, they died of AIDS in the late 80s. One
mm,
died in 1986 when I was like 17, and the other one died in 1990. And we never talked about it. Never talked about like how they died. We talked, what I was told, even though I knew the truth, what I was told was it was cancer.
mm,
So my mom has passed away for a couple of years now, but in the last couple of years, I've been unpacking some of that early stuff with my dad. Like, why didn't we talk about that? We knew. And there was a fear of what people would think. My mom was like really um, mostly focused on image management. So,
mm.
like, no matter what was going on inside the house, like, we had to project like an image of, the perfect, couple, two kids, everything's good, swept a lot of stuff under the rug. And if you're you have a nose for the truth and a nose for when people are, being deceptive, you sense like there's just something off. And so that was
Mhm.
me. And I think like I would have been that curious kid who would ask my dad, lots of questions, and he would not know how to handle a lot of that. And so a lot of what I heard was, well, because I said so. And,
Yeah.
why does there always
Right.
have to be a
Yes.
question why? And so it's not uncommon, but
Yeah.
yet it sends a message to a kid that your questions aren't like it's gaslighting. It's like,
Hmm.
like when you talk about truth and you're like, oh, that's not really truth, or when things are at the surface, like I just had this curiosity for like, you know, all things. And so like I don't think that they knew quite what to do with me. And so um
Tim, can I ask something? So
yeah,
your sibling, did they fit in
That's
a little
good.
bit better?
I would say she would have been like the compliant one who would have
Mm,
just gone along with and not maybe been as much of a rebel. And so like through my adolescence, like I had some challenging behavioral things, and I think like through bullying and through like one incident I think I just stands out is I had a sixth grade teacher who was a male, and I really identified, and I was kind of like that teacher's pet with this guy. And I think I was looking for kind of maybe father figures that I aligned with more and like, interests. And he was really into sports. And so, like, I had this kind of relationship with him, teacher, looked up to him. And at some point during the year, I got into trouble with a couple other boys, and they separated each of us from these classrooms. And so this teacher, after that incident, he really didn't talk to me.
oh,
Mm.
And so fast forward a couple years, and that teacher's a coach, and I'm playing basketball with a bunch of other older kids, and I fall awkwardly on a certain basketball move, and I kind of stumble, and they started calling me Messy Marvin. And if you remember Messy Marvin
yeah,
from the
yeah.
commercials. And like this teacher was like the one who was leading the charge, so to speak, and I was really confused as to like why someone who's in that kind of a role would be, I'll just say it, like bullying me with like or picking on me. And so I think I had like a chip on my shoulder, always looking for like and just having this layer of protection and defensiveness. And so like um I think something in my spirit broke at that point where I was like, okay, I don't trust people.
Mm,
And so like from then on, I'm like, I'm on my own. I don't trust people, particularly authority figures. Um, And I would fast forward and I could tell stories in my professional life where I've had some challenges with authority figures who represent that because I said so person. I had one instance where like a boss closed the door, pounded his fist on the table and told me I had to do something that I knew my client wouldn't like, but he's like, I'm the boss, pound the fist because I said so. You do what I say. And I'm like, and I honestly, this was like a trauma flashback where I just lit up with rage. And if you ever get that like intense, like, where is this
Yeah.
coming from? This flashback. And so, like, that incident long ago kind of set the course for, like, I would just say, like, that orphan spirit, that orphan heart where, like, don't trust people. You want to be close, but people aren't safe. So you're like oscillating between wanting closeness, but fearing it. And so I think I lived most of the rest of my life up until the last several years with like this just like skepticism, and I think I was also then very capable of compartmentalizing my life because around that time back in, early part of high school, I found drugs and alcohol.
Mm,
And that was like an escape. That was a way to numb. That was a way to like,
for
and
sure.
I got language for it now. I didn't have the language for it back then in terms of what that was doing, but that was just like you've got this ache, this pain inside, and that would be a way to escape that. And I'm doing a lot of the last 5 to 10 years, I've done a lot of deep work, and part of that is like, what are the coping mechanisms? And fantasy and escaping was always like one of those that was accessible, because if things were chaotic in my house, I always had a place to retreat, whether it was my room or in my head and all of that. So like drugs and alcohol could be another way to not
Hmm.
just numb out or escape.
Hmm.
So
I know
that
that
became
one.
like a coping
Mm.
mechanism. And then, fast forward into college and getting out of college. In college, I'd say, I was on the page of embracing all of college and, learning about myself, but, drugs and alcohol were a big part of like, and I would, I don't drink anymore and I don't do drugs anymore. I don't know that I would ever have considered myself an alcoholic, but I would have abused alcohol in a big way. And so it definitely would have been a crutch. It definitely would have been something that I used to kind of cope with social situations. But in
Hmm.
college, I would have done it to an excess amount and, had a number of like blackout situations. So the other thing that became like a pattern was relationships. So I would have been the person who was looking to see what I need to do to earn someone's love. And so, like, I would be like that, get into that rescue mode or that fix mode or looking for someone who I could. And it would have started back early in my life with my mother, where there would be times where, like, as a game, she would like pretend cry,
Mm.
and then like my job would be to figure out what I could do to make her happy. And then like she
Ah,
might remove her hands from her face from trying to pretend she was crying, and then like she'd be like happy. So like it sent a very early signal that like managing other people's emotions
Yeah.
is like my job.
You said
And
something, you said image maintenance.
yeah,
That was a lot in my
oh,
family. A
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
same era, but the same, like we had to look like a certain family and
yeah, yeah.
that
were
Look,
you close? Did you and your sister have
yeah.
any closeness, or was it just where you're
Mm-mm.
just two strangers living under the same roof?
we I don't think we were that close. We were very different. She wasn't into sports at all. She was like into books, and that might have been her escape. I mean, she used to get in trouble for reading, like,
Same.
That's
which,
funny.
today parents would be like, I'd love it. My kid would pick up a book, and that'd be great. But like, instead of like cleaning her room, she'd be like reading, and she'd get in trouble. She'd hide her books in different parts of the
Oh,
bathroom because that's, she'd get. And so we didn't have a really close relationship. And I live in Cleveland. She lives in San Diego. She moved out there. We see each other occasionally, but we aren't. really that close. And a
Does
lot
she
of just
does she know the
different interests.
does she know the work you're doing around adoption and is
Yeah,
she interested in
so
that?
10 years ago, when Ohio changed their laws, she was the one who told me, hey, did you know
Mm.
Ohio's changing their laws? You can write to the state and you can get your original birth certificate. And so she and I both did that.
Now,
Um,
had you, prior to that, so I mean, you were in your 40s, right?
yeah,
Had you started a search?
Mm-hmm.
Did, there wasn't any kind of impetus to,
I
you'd
was
been thinking
always,
about it as a child, but so
yeah,
you didn't,
yeah. So it's interesting because my sister always seemed to want to know. And when I would see the reaction of my mom, which I kind of mentioned before, where it seemed like
Mhm.
she would be a little anxious about that, I kind of got onto the page of like saying I don't want to know, and not like thinking about like, are there ways in which I maybe could find out? Because the records were closed. So I just assumed, okay, they're closed. And so I blocked it out. But as soon as she told me that the laws were changing, and all you had to do is send $20 in a letter and you would get back a birth certificate. I'm like, well, why would I not do that? So like everything changed when it became easy to do. And it's interesting because in what I received back, within a couple weeks, I received back a original birth certificate and then also a letter that would have been put into my file in 1993, where my biological mother said, like, if she must have said, hey, to the state, if he reaches out and inquires, please release my contact information
Oh,
in 1993. And so this is 2015. So like 22 years later. And so like I went from like not thinking about it a lot. And honestly, I was distracted with a whole bunch of other things in my life that weren't like good. Went through a divorce, and then went through some addition, and then I got remarried, and then was going through some struggles in that. So I mean, I've been divorced now twice, and I was struggling from time to time with alcohol, with just struggles in relationships, and so like I would have had a dark period, I would say, between 25 and 45, where I was just trying to outrun this like tidal wave of stuff that was going to crash on me. And so I would have been using all different ways of coping and compartmentalization. And then when it became possible to get this information, I got it. And as soon as I got the information, I put her name in Google and like all this information came up.
wow.
So
And
she
she
was
had looked
a,
for you. She had wanted to know you.
yeah. So it was interesting because she was a civil rights attorney, and
Mm.
so she had a
That's
very
interesting.
public career, and there was a lot of information. Um, and this was in April of 2015, and I found that she lived in Houston. She spent most of her career in the Bay Area, but had moved to Houston, and it's easy to find her. And so I connected through a letter with her, and then in May she happened to be coming to Cleveland because she was on the advisory board of the law school at Cleveland State. So from the time I found out in April of 2015, there was probably like maybe less than a month, and then I met her.
And how old had she been when you were born?
21.
21.
Yeah. So her and my biological father were both in school. She was in undergrad, he was in law school. And so they were both from the Canton area, um, in which is like 45 minutes from Cleveland. And then so they were both going to school up in Cleveland. And so yeah, I met her, and it was, I didn't read The Primal Wound. I didn't read any other adoption book until 5 or so years after this, which would have been helpful.
Yeah.
So it was pretty scripted in terms of the way this all went, and it was like this honeymoon period, like all this like amazing reconnection, and one of the first things she said though was like, after I didn't hear from you after all those years, I didn't know what to think. So there was an assumption that that letter she sent in 1993, that somehow it made its way to me, and I didn't do anything with it.
Oh,
So that was interesting to me because I didn't know about it. Like, and if I did, I might have reached out. So, but she might have had the assumption that I knew but didn't do anything, and so she's like, I didn't know what to think. But she was never married and never had any other kids.
Oh, hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. But although she has a brother who's 19 years younger than her, so she kind of raised he after their father died, he moved to the Bay Area and she kind of raised him from that. And then he has a couple sons that are now just 14. And then she has in Houston, she had a sister who had a nephew who, so she's got like surrogate kids and grandkids kind of in her life. So we met, and it was like really kind of that honeymoon period. She met my parents, she met my wife at the time and my kids. Over the course of a couple months, we saw each other like 3 times. And after she met my kids and my wife, like we spent a weekend together, looked at a lot of pictures, and just relived, shared with her a lot of things through my life. Then over the course of the next couple months, we would correspond with emails and stuff like that, and then the communication kind of dropped off, um, and
Is that on your part or her part or just
it was a
naturally?
little bit of both. I mean, I recently just went back and looked at some of the emails, and there was like some apologies for, hey, it's taken for a while for me to get back to you, and all that. And I had an opportunity to be in Houston for some business, and we were going to make some arrangements to see each other, and that kind of fell through. And it was probably a couple years later, it was on a Mother's Day, where I sent a letter to her, and I was like, okay, when we met, there's a lot of things going on. A lot of things in my life were going on that I was trying her to prevent her from seeing. I was struggling with things in my marriage and all of that. And so I was trying to make it seem like I have everything together when I didn't. Right. Trying to prove, it's really around like what I learned, like image management. Like,
Yeah.
look at me. And here's the biggest thing I think that whole meeting did is like, both her and my father were attorneys. Both of my parents that raised me, they didn't go to college. And so, like, I had a frame of reference for my life in comparison to the parents that raised me. And I thought I was doing good, and I professionally had done really well and all that. But then I meet my biological parents, and I feel like, okay, it answered a lot of questions as to like, why am I the way I am in comparison to the environment I was raised in. But it also was unsettling because then there was the significant, like, well, what if things,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
all that. And at that time, like, I'm making assumptions about like their own stories, and I can make an assumption around, okay, if you're an attorney and you've had that kind of career, like you had it all together. Well, that might not be the case. But anyway, this triggers this deep like discovery, self discovery of like, where did I come from, and the big, nurture versus nature type of thing. And like, what one of the first things that she said was, if competitiveness was a gene, you got a double dose. Because I would have been like, man, I'm intensely competitive to a fault, and I don't know where that comes from because my parents are like not at all competitive, and so it just led to a lot of questions. Um, and part of it was then like, okay, um, this had an impact on my life bigger than I could have ever imagined. And at 50 years old, like I probably had, sometimes you look at like events and times and say, was that the rock bottom? And I thought that I probably had like three different rock bottoms. And so like maybe my first one was where I just had I talked about some of the anger, and the anger started coming out, and it came out towards a family member, it came out at work and in another setting, and to the point where I was self-medicating and just in a tough spot. And so I ended up, like, let's say, phoning a friend, so to speak, and saying, I need some help. And I ended up going to a trauma residential treatment in a trauma mental health addiction clinic. So basically, I took 60 days to go dig into, like, what's going on, what's the origin of all this anger, and then the patterns of addiction. And I would just say that, like, it's like whack-a-mole. Like, it could be drugs or alcohol or food or relationships or whatever. Like, and I could trade them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I could stop drinking or any of that stuff, but then it would be food, or it'd be competing or working, or and now I even understand, like, kind of over functioning in a
Mhm.
relationship is like probably the one that's still the most prominent, because it's like subtle. It is destructive, but in a subtle way. So that's one that's like I'm thinking about. So I went away, and um but before I go there, going back on that Mother's Day a couple years ago, was before I went to this place. I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, it's kind of crazy when we started. We had this honeymoon period, kind of fast and furious. But I would be open to maybe reconnecting and, like, seeing if we can start over, or just kind of, you know, see what it would look like to reestablish some connection." And it took her like 3 weeks to respond. And basically it was, I did a lot of processing. It was great to meet you. It looks like you have a
Ooh,
great life, great family, and all that. But I'm good.
oh yeah,
Wow.
that
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah. So the first thing I did was, like, kind of put that into Google, and, like, basically it comes up and it's like secondary rejection.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
But it's nothing to do with you, but, like, it's the and it's described in, like, the primal wound, and other books that talk
yeah.
about that, where it's the pain of the loss and seeing all of what I missed out, really challenging for someone. And I know that um it became too much for her, and so she's like, "No, I'm good." So that doesn't feel good, but I understand it. But I think it's taken a while to process that. So when I go to this trauma facility, I'm kind of in a bubble for, like, period of time, 30 days at this place, and then 30 days in a sober living house in Houston, which was ironic because that's
Mm.
Oh,
maybe like 4 miles away from where she lived.
wow.
So, but I dug into attachment style. I dug into codependency. I dug into the addiction cycle. I dug into all the different things that impact our mental health with, the mind body connection, and, got into meditation, and got into, kind of what does it look like to regulate
Hmm.
your nervous system, and all the different types of things. But we didn't dig into the impact of adoption.
I was gonna ask that. Did they bring that up at all?
I would mention, like, I'm adopted. I don't know if that means anything. And like, yeah, we didn't dig into that. So, and I didn't read The Primal Wound until after that experience. So, like, so that would be like one rock bottom. And then, like, coming back into my life after 60 days, like, I'm like feeling kind of, I got clarity. I'm committed to kind of dealing with life instead of numbing and escaping. And then COVID hits, and COVID just forced me to deal with things, like a lot of people that, like, are right in front of you. And it was the relationship that I was in that was also really challenging because I think um, I would have not used my voice at times. I would have known how to articulate my needs. I would have not known how to advocate for myself. And so avoidance would be another coping mechanism. And COVID kind of took some of those ways of avoiding away from us when we're in an environment with people that we need to kind of, coexist with. And so I ended up getting divorced in 2021. And um, the big thing I think there was to realize that I can only focus on my own recovery. I can't do someone else's recovery. And it's really hard, like, because one of the things they say in treatment is like sometimes the addict gets better and others get bitter.
Yeah.
So I think it's around, breaking the cycle. And so like what what kind of then transpired is I'll say because of my orientation, I probably have a fear of being alone. So I end up getting into another relationship pretty soon after this the divorce. And with a person who may have some mirroring of trauma and all of that. So there's like trauma bonding and stuff like that. But what I also did is, like I mentioned early on in my story of growing up in a Catholic kind of upbringing, but so the presentation of religion early in my life was also probably misrepresented in terms of like very judgmental, very like rules, very like you've got to be clean, almost like you got to, present yourself in a particular way in order to be worthy of God.
Yeah.
So like I just had like a bad taste in my mouth from that experience, and I just didn't have any kind of faith. But when I started to get into this self discovery, I started to really become a bit more in tune with spirituality, not necessarily religion, but spirituality. But after I got divorced, I ended up getting introduced to a church that was a non denominational type of church. And the first series that I got introduced to was they were talking about toxic relationships. And I was like, well, this is like what I've been digging into in a self-help in this healing journey. And so it was very interesting to be in a church where it wasn't like the what I had been used to. And it was like basically the pastor saying, hey, we're a bunch of dysfunctional people. All we're trying to do is help people make sense of Christianity and of Jesus. And the big thing in that first series was like if you want peace, you have to surrender. Like total freedom equals total surrender. Total surrender equals total freedom. And like when I went to treatment, like one of the things I ask you is like, well, what do you want out of this? And I just want to be at peace. And if
Mm.
and if you have like this internal war going on, like it's not peaceful. Like it's like all this stuff going on, and you just kind of want to escape all of that or figure out a way to, surrender all of that. And so I found myself really embracing Christianity in a new way. And it was a lot around like understanding the stories of the Bible. And frankly, from an adoptee's perspective, there is a whole bunch of things in the Bible about God's heart for orphans and widows and
Mhm.
how we're all adopted into his kingdom. And so like it started to make some sense to me that like I thought I had to be a particular way in order to be worthy, but frankly when I understood more of the story of truly what's in the Bible by reading it because I never really read it, um those with an orphan spirit are the ones that he was coming to find and to help. And so fast forward to probably the most significant rock bottom of mine, a couple years ago, in the workplace. I'm dealing with what I would just call narcissistic abuse, and really tough situation at work. And one day I just put my head down and cried. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Just interacting with people who were undermining, who were um, just not very kind. It just became too much. And I found myself again reaching for different ways of coping instead of dealing with life on life's terms. And I just, you know, said, I got to surrender all of this. And around that time, I was also planning to get baptized. I got baptized, and then my work situation basically, I left the organization, um, and um, everything changed. Everything changed, and so like I realized like I have to take ownership of certain things, and I have to advocate for myself. And I can remove myself from situations. And so over the last 18 months, it's been this just probably more of a spiritual awakening where I'm truly embracing that I don't have to do it all on my own. I can be in community with other people. I can be vulnerable. I can really learn what it means to trust people. And so much of this is I read this one book that was called the um, From Spiritual Slavery to Spiritual Sonship. And slavery is fear of, you don't trust people, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy. And the bridge to get to being a true son is forgiveness.
Mm.
And so forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others. And so like I have a long list of things I need to forgive myself for, but a long list of people who I think I was um, holding on to bitterness and anger and resentment and all that. And so it's been this process of just letting that stuff go and really learning what it means to be free of the bondage that I kept myself in. I mean, there's these memes where, you know, there's a person who's in prison holding the bars, but there's no door on the, you know, there's a free door open on the right and on the left, but somehow I'm still in keeping myself in prison.
I
So
have a question for you. Your father,
yeah, yeah,
did you have a relationship? Do you?
yeah. So a year after I met my mother, she when I met her, she wrote him a letter. She's like, I haven't talked to him in 40 years, but I know he's a lawyer. He's still in the Cleveland area, and there's a strong resemblance between you and him. So she wrote him a letter, and it took him a year. He wrote her back, but it took him a year to write me a letter. So in 2016, he writes me a letter. And I knew who he was before she told me,
Yeah.
because when she told me that there was a strong resemblance and that he was still alive, like the birth certificate, my name on the birth certificate, Thomas Griffin Demchak, I just put Thomas Griffin, attorneys in Cleveland, and
There
his
he was.
information showed up. And like he's got two sons.
Oh. Did he know about
Um,
you? Did he know
he,
about you?
he knew, he
Okay.
knew, but the circumstances in their relationship, I think, were like two Catholic raised kids in the late 60s. Um, they didn't, I don't know if they knew what to do. So they like, this was the option. I guess they didn't think that they could get married at that time, didn't think that they would be able to do that. And so adoption was the solution, and the records were closed. And I think, they
Mhm.
thought that that's just kind of how it would be. And so it was a shock when like the laws changed. And so I think it took him a long time to process that. And um, I have a relationship with him. We've probably met each other 15 times or so.
Oh, okay.
Lunch, we
Yeah.
talk. 10 years, and he still hasn't told his sons.
Oh.
Oh, gosh, that's
So, and the interesting thing is that like um my ex-wife's sister was in a friend group with one of his sons in high school. And I know two people who are from the Baltimore area that know um, one of the son's wives. Like, so there's like, when I went to rehab, I met someone who went to college with like
mhm.
them at Notre Dame. So very interesting kind of the way there's connections. Um,
They're your brothers.
they're my brothers.
Mhm.
I know, like I've seen them Facebook pictures, and like I have people that are connected with them. But so I'm in that stage of like saying, it's not really in my hands. I could force it easily, but like I'm just letting the process play out. But that's the challenging piece of like the tension between, you know, living in truth and still being kind of someone's secret.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's like part of the story. There's a lot of
Unfolding.
tentacles to the story, and that's one that continues to play out. Now, I would say what's been interesting is I mentioned I got baptized, and through ancestry, um, shortly after that, I met my biological mother's cousin, who's a pastor, and then I met her brother. So one of her siblings, she's got five, six siblings. I met a couple of them in 2015. I didn't meet one of her brothers. He's a believer, and I met him a little bit over a year ago, and I have a really close relationship with him.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the tension now is that she's angry at
Oh.
him for having a relationship with me. And so I would say within the last 18 months, like I've learned more about a bigger picture in my story because of the relationship that I have with him. And what he would have shared with me is that like she didn't tell her family that she had a son for like 25 years.
Mm.
So the themes throughout my story, whether it's in biological or adoptive, is secrets.
Mhm.
It's sweeping things under the rug. It's denial of truth. And even like with my biological father, like once the information comes out, there's still a desire to control the narrative,
Mhm.
which is like, I want to decide what part of reality do we deal with and who gets to deal with that. So like, um, it's a interesting mosaic, I guess, of like
It is.
complex stuff. And what what is sometimes not always easy is like, there's pain all around. There's pain, there's shame, there's all, when you say, okay, well, why is it the way it is? Well, it's the generations of stuff that everybody's been carrying, sometimes forced to carry it versus like willingly. But at any rate, like I just now understand like and through the work I've done from a faith standpoint, one of the services that really resonated with me that our pastor talked about was like how do you turn your pain into a purpose?
Mm,
Because you could stay stuck in the kind of poor me, victimhood, why me, why did all this happen? Or you could say, you know what? If more people told their stories about
mhm.
all of this stuff, more people would see that they're not alone. And when you think about all the things related to adoptees, there's an over-representation of adoptees in addiction clinics, and
Yeah.
Of
looking at
course, we talk about that
divorces,
often.
looking at all of the different things that we would struggle with. And so now, like, what's interesting is I've gone to a couple different retreats, and anytime I get into a circle where there's always someone that either has adopted kids, whether they're international or other types of adoptions, or someone is adopted, and we get together. It's amazing because if someone has adopted kids, it's predictable what type of behaviors that they might experience from their children that
Yeah.
they don't know what to do with. Like, there's times where like they just want to be alone, and or there's times where there's this unexplained anger, or this like separation anxiety, or just different types of behaviors. And I think what's helpful is to help people understand that you can't possibly understand the internal world of an adoptee, and there's different stages where the adoptee, 11, 12, like, they won't even know, they won't have
Yeah.
language for it. I didn't have the language for what was going on earlier in my life, but there's no possible way that you can love the trauma out of a child, right? And that's what's challenging for a parent, to think that, like, but I'm doing all the things I think are the right things, and it still doesn't seem like it's good enough. Well, there's an internal world of trauma that's
Yeah.
unexplainable. And if it's from a foster care or orphanage, all that, there's so many different complexities. And I think the biggest thing is that there's help, there's like resources. I think what you guys are doing is great. I know Cleveland has the Adoption Network of Cleveland. That's a
Right.
really, prominent organization that's, trying to be a support for people that have these experiences. So, that's where I'm finding kind of some uh, purpose in sharing the stories, connecting with people, and in particular also even outside of the world of adoption, you're looking at men, and men stepping into vulnerability, men stepping into sharing with others the struggles, that they're not alone, because so many people are dealing with all kinds of challenging circumstances that we never really were prepared to deal with. And we wear masks to hide.
Yeah.
We try to muscle through with achievement, or all the different types of ways in which you'd say, well, that's just over functioning, trying to cope with things. And, I might have the car, I might have the house, I might have all these things, but I don't feel fulfilled. And I think
Mhm.
that often, there's a hole that, we have, and, it can't be filled by all those things outside of ourselves. So there's got to be some a bit of, connecting with other people,
Mhm.
and community, and, higher power, faith, I think, is a big part of um, what can really be gratifying when we embrace that.
Yeah. I like what you said about purpose because we feel that. I mean, I feel that through our work,
Yeah,
that's helping us, helping others. We recently finished a book about that. Cameron Lee
yeah,
Small had that in
yeah,
finding your purpose and telling
yeah.
your
Yeah.
story, saying what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because just this week I was at a men's group, and it was all about the telling of stories, and
Mm,
how the transformational work that happens when we embrace, first of all, that we have a story. Because there's some people like, oh, my childhood was fine, and then you list all the different things that happened, like there was, dad was an alcoholic, and all the other types of things. Well, fine, in my experience, means feelings inside not expressed,
mm,
right? Because how often is like the answer to, hey, how are you doing? I'm fine.
fine.
Right? And that just means, well, how much time do you have? because I'm not really fine, but I don't really want to burden you with all the stuff. But like part of that is like I didn't learn how to process those types of emotions. And so that's another big part of it is that like if I got angry, I tried to chase the anger away versus like it's okay to be angry, just don't project it onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
There's healthy
Yeah.
ways of processing emotions. But purpose is a big deal, I think, because honestly, like if you think about like all the ways in which adoptees are misunderstood by people, you say, well, like if you understood the internal world and took time to understand the complexities of the adoption experience, so getting the stories out there is tremendously valuable so
Yeah.
that like from an education standpoint, but also from a community standpoint in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how many times do you have people who, um, by telling your story, helps other people understand their
Right.
own story, right? So every time someone tells a story to me, I understand my own story a lot better because I might see something different that in my own story that they would have shared.
Thank you, Tim, for all
Yeah.
of this. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and your arc has been
Yeah.
great. I'm sure, and by telling your story, there will definitely be somebody that
I
hears it
think
and relates. And
Yeah, yeah.
so we really appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable. That's
Thank
that's
you. I
another
appreciate the
piece.
opportunity. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate the opportunity, and I think it's amazing what you guys are doing to just kind of give this
Thank you.
platform and allow people to come on and share.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Tim.